The breaking point. The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished stone and crystallized light. For 2 centuries, this place had been the center of power for 847 different species. The chamber floated in perfect orbit around the neutral star of Axios, far from any home world, belonging to no one and everyone at the same time. Ambassador Sarah Chin sat in the human section, her dark eyes scanning the enormous room. 20 years had passed since humanity first walked through those massive doors. 20 years of learning, trading, and carefully watching. Her gray suit was simple compared to the elaborate garments and biological displays of other delegates, but she wore it with quiet dignity. Beside her sat Commander James Okoye, head of human military intelligence, and Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the chief scientist of Earth's diplomatic corps. They were calm on the outside, but Sarah could feel the tension radiating from both of them. Today would change everything. The session began with the usual ceremonies. The Speaker of the Council, an ancient being called Morpheus who existed as pure energy contained in a floating sphere, opened the proceedings with traditional words that had been spoken for generations. His voice resonated through the chamber without sound, reaching directly into the minds of every being present. Then High Chancellor Vex of the Thalorian Empire rose to speak. The Thalorians were tall, their bodies covered in scales that shifted between deep purple and midnight blue. They had been members of the Council for over 1,000 years and held more influence than almost any other species. Vex's 4 eyes gleamed with confidence as he addressed the Assembly. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "Today we present for final approval the Coordination Accord. This treaty will bring greater unity to our galaxy. It will ensure that all member species work together for the common good." Sarah listened as Vex explained the accord. On the surface, it sounded reasonable. Shared military resources, coordinated economic policies, unified response to threats. But buried in the language were clauses that would strip humanity of its sovereignty. Human ships would be commanded by Council officers. Human worlds would follow Council law above their own. Human resources would be distributed as the Council decided. It was a cage wrapped in pretty words. Other species spoke in favor of the accord. The Kelthans praised its economic benefits. The Zorvathi emphasized the security it would provide. One by one, representatives stood and added their voices to the chorus of approval. Sarah noticed that most of the species speaking were ancient, powerful, and well-established in the Council's hierarchy. The younger species, those who had joined within the last few centuries, remained mostly silent. Their representatives looked uncomfortable, but they did not object. They had learned not to challenge the Council's will. When it was humanity's turn to speak, Sarah stood slowly. Every eye in the chamber turned toward her. She walked to the central platform, her footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. "Members of the Council," she began, "humanity has studied this accord carefully. We have consulted with our governments, our scientists, and our people. We have one question before we respond." Vex's expression showed mild annoyance. This was supposed to be a simple approval, a formality. "Ask your question, Ambassador Chun." Sarah pulled a small device from her pocket and activated it. A holographic display appeared above the central platform, visible to every being in the chamber. It showed a star map with dozens of systems marked in red. "Can the High Chancellor explain what happened to these civilizations?" Sarah asked quietly. The chamber erupted in whispers. The marked systems were scattered across the galaxy, each one labeled with a species name that most delegates had never heard before. The Darani, the Westhold, the Quinn Collective, the Harmonious. 23 names in total. Vex's scales darkened. Those are extinct species, Ambassador, victims of war, disease, or natural disaster. Tragic losses that we all mourn. "That is not what our research shows," Sarah replied. She expanded the hologram. "The Darani were forced to accept a treaty similar to this accord 400 years ago. Within 50 years, their government was dissolved, their resources were claimed by council members, and their people were scattered across the galaxy as laborers. The Westhold resisted such a treaty and were declared dangerous. A peacekeeping force destroyed their civilization. The Quinn Collective signed the treaty, and then mysteriously suffered plague that killed 90% of their population. The whispers grew louder. Sarah continued, her voice carrying across the chamber. Every species marked on this map was young when they joined the council. Every one of them was growing in power and influence. Every one of them was offered a coordination treaty. And every one of them is now gone. Dr. Tanaka stood and walked to join Sarah. We have spent 15 years investigating this pattern, Yuki said. We accessed old archives, recovered data from abandoned stations, and interviewed survivors. The evidence is clear. The Galactic Council has been systematically eliminating species that might one day challenge the established power structure. The chamber descended into chaos. Representatives shouted questions and denials. Some demanded proof. Others looked shocked, as if pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place in their minds. Vex's voice cut through the noise like a blade. This is outrageous. You dare accuse the Council of genocide? You, a species barely 2 decades old in galactic society? You understand nothing of our history or our challenges. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. We understand perfectly, High Chancellor. You control younger species by offering them friendship and guidance. You study them carefully, learning their weaknesses. Then, when they grow strong enough to threaten your power, you destroy them. Sometimes with war, sometimes with disease, sometimes with treaties that slowly strangle them. You have done this for centuries. Commander Okoye activated another display. This one showed intercepted communications, financial records, and military documents. All of them pointed to Tellurian involvement in the destruction of younger civilizations. Some showed similar involvement by other elder species of the Council. We know about the biological weapons you developed specifically to target the Quinn genome, James said, his voice hard. We know about the economic sanctions you used to star the Harmonious. We know about the false flag attacks you staged to justify destroying the Westhold. We have proof of all of it. The chamber fell silent. The evidence was damning, and everyone could see it. Sarah looked around at the faces of delegates who had called themselves Friends of Humanity. She saw shock on some faces, guilt on others, and calculation on many more. Humanity came to this council with hope, Sarah said softly. We believed in the dream of a united galaxy. We wanted to learn from older, wiser species. We wanted to contribute to something greater than ourselves. She paused and gestured to the holographic evidence floating in the air. But we also learned from history. We saw what happened to others who trusted too easily, so we prepared. Sarah touched the control on her device. New images appeared, showing massive shipyards and hidden locations throughout human space. Fleets of warships unlike anything in the Council's database. Defensive platforms surrounding Earth and every major human colony. Weapons based on scientific principles that the Council had never explored. For 15 years, while you watched our merchants and scientists and diplomats, we were also building, Sarah explained. We took the knowledge you shared with us and pushed it in directions you never considered. We prepared for the day when you would try to do to us what you did to the others. Vex's scales had turned almost black. You have violated dozens of Council regulations. Secret military buildup, unauthorized weapons research, espionage against Council members. You have just confessed to crimes that warrant immediate action. Yes, Sarah agreed calmly. We have broken your rules. Just as you broke the fundamental rules of civilized behavior by murdering 23 entire civilizations. She gathered her materials and nodded to her delegation. Humanity withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. We will no longer participate in this corrupt institution. We will no longer pretend that it represents justice or cooperation. The chamber exploded with shouts and demands. Some species called for humanity to be arrested. Others demanded military action. A few sat in stunned silence, their minds racing through the implications. Sarah walked toward the exit with James and Yuki beside her. The entire human delegation followed, their footsteps echoing in the chaos. As they reached the massive doors, Sarah turned back one final time. We are not your enemies, she called out, her voice somehow carrying over the noise. But we will not be your victims either. Any species that wants peace with humanity will have it. Any species that chooses war will regret that choice. The decision is yours. The doors closed behind them with a sound like thunder. In the command center of a human flagship Perseverance, Admiral Marcus Webb received the signal he had been waiting for. The delegation was safe and heading home. Around him, officers moved with practiced efficiency, preparing for what would come next. All ships, this is Admiral Webb, he announced over the fleet communication channel. Operation Guardian is now active. Move to defensive positions around all human colonies and trade routes. Rules of engagement are authorized. If they come for us, we will be ready. Throughout human space, hundreds of ships that had been hidden for years began moving into position. Defensive satellites came online. Ground forces mobilized. Humanity had spent 2 decades preparing for this moment, and they would not be caught unprepared. Back on the council station, High Chancellor Vex stood before the remaining delegates. His scales rippled with barely controlled rage. "This cannot stand," he declared. "Humanity has insulted the Council, violated our laws, and threatened galactic peace. They must be brought to heel." Some delegates nodded in agreement. Others looked uncertain. A few quietly began making plans to contact humanity in private, to distance themselves from what they feared was coming. In the hours after the human walkout, the galaxy began to fracture. Ancient alliances were tested. Old assumptions crumbled. Species that had never questioned the Council's authority began asking dangerous questions. And in the darkness of space, 2 civilizations prepared for a confrontation that would determine whether humanity would survive as a free people or become the 24th name on a list of extinct species. Sarah Chun sat in her quarters aboard the transport ship carrying her home to Earth. She looked out at the stars and allowed herself to feel the weight of what she had done. She had just ended 2 decades of peaceful relations. She had exposed secrets that would shake the foundations of galactic society. She had started something that might end in war, but she had also told the truth. She had stood up for her people. She had refused to lead humanity meekly into a trap that had destroyed so many others. The galaxy had watched in terror as humans marched out of the assembly. Now it would discover what humanity was truly capable of when pushed to the breaking point. The game had changed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The turning tide. The first 48 hours after humanity's departure from the Galactic Council were the most dangerous in recorded history. Across the galaxy, governments scrambled to understand what had just happened. Emergency meetings were called. Intelligence agencies worked without sleep. Military forces were mobilized. High Chancellor Vex wasted no time. Within 6 hours of the human walkout, he had assembled a coalition of 12 species willing to take military action against humanity. They called themselves the Council Defense Alliance, claiming they were protecting galactic peace and order. In reality, they were protecting their own power. The Thalorian Empire contributed the largest fleet, over 2,000 warships of various classes. The Kelthans added 800 ships. The Zorvathi, the Mandros Collective, and 8 other species brought their forces as well. Together, the Alliance commanded nearly 5,000 combat vessels, the largest military force assembled in over a century. Their target was the Outer Reaches, a region of space where humanity had established several colonies and trading posts over the past 15 years. The Alliance believed that crushing these remote settlements would force humanity to surrender before a larger war could begin. They were catastrophically wrong. Admiral Marcus Webb stood on the bridge of the Perseverance, watching the Alliance fleet approach on long-range sensors. His own force numbered only 300 ships, a fraction of what the enemy had brought. But Marcus was not worried. He had spent his entire adult life preparing for this exact scenario. "Enemy fleet entering weapons range in 20 minutes, reported Captain Lisa Rodriguez from the tactical station. "They are maintaining standard formation, capital ships in the center, escorts on the flanks." Marcus nodded. The Alliance was using traditional tactics, the kind that had worked for centuries in galactic warfare. But humanity had studied those tactics carefully and had developed something different, something the Alliance had never seen before. "Deploy the shadow net," Marcus ordered. Throughout the human fleet, ships activated a new type of stealth technology. It did not make them invisible, but it made them extremely difficult to target accurately. The technology interfered with the targeting systems that most galactic species used, systems that had not been significantly updated in generations. The Alliance fleet opened fire at maximum range, launching thousands of missiles and energy beams toward human positions. But most of their shots missed or hit empty space where sensors said human ships should be. The few hits that landed caused minimal damage. "Return fire," Marcus said calmly. "Target their command ships first." The human fleet responded with weapons that moved faster and hit harder than Alliance commanders expected. Railguns accelerated projectiles to a significant fraction of light speed. Particle beams punched through shields that were designed to stop traditional energy weapons. Missiles with advanced guidance systems weaved through point defense fire that should have stopped them. The Alliance flagship, a massive DeLorean dreadnought called Eternal Glory, took 3 direct hits in the first exchange. Its shields failed, and its hull was breached in 7 places. High Admiral Zethros, commanding the Alliance fleet, stared at his damage reports in disbelief. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Our intelligence said humans had inferior technology." His tactical officer looked pale. "Sir, their weapons are using principles we have never encountered. Our shields are not calibrated to stop them. Our armor is not designed to absorb these impacts." The battle became a massacre. Human ships moved with precision and coordination that suggested an advanced tactical computer network linking the entire fleet. They focused fire on one enemy ship at a time, destroying it completely before moving to the next target. There was no wasted effort, no hesitation, no mercy. Alliance ships tried to adapt. They changed formations, adjusted their shields, and attempted new tactics. Nothing worked. The humans anticipated every move and countered it effectively. It was as if they were fighting an enemy that knew every page of the Alliance tactical manual and had written responses to each one. After 2 hours, High Admiral Zethros made the hardest decision of his military career. All ships retreat, jump to hyperspace immediately. The Alliance fleet fled, leaving behind nearly 800 destroyed or disabled vessels. The human fleet had lost only 19 ships, and most of those were damaged rather than destroyed. It was the most one-sided victory in modern galactic history. Marcus watched the enemy retreat and allowed himself a small smile. "Send a message to Earth. The outer reaches are secure. Phase 2 can begin." Phase 2 was something that would shock the galaxy even more than the military victory. While the Alliance was licking its wounds and trying to understand how they had been so thoroughly beaten, human ships began transmitting something across every communication channel in known space. The transmission contained the full evidence that Ambassador Chun had presented to the Council, along with additional information that humanity had been gathering for years. Detailed records of Tellurian genetic experiments. Financial records showing how elder species had systematically exploited younger ones. Testimony from survivors of civilizations that the Council had destroyed. Communications between High Chancellor Vex and other leaders discussing which species to target next. The evidence was overwhelming, verifiable, and impossible to ignore. On the planet Kelthos Prime, Professor Nevin sat in his university office and reviewed the human transmission with growing horror. He was a historian, one of the most respected in Kelthon society. He had spent his life studying the rise and fall of civilizations, never suspecting that his own government might be responsible for some of those falls. "By the ancestors," he whispered, reading through the documents. "It is all true." He was not alone. Across the galaxy, millions of academics, journalists, and ordinary citizens examined the evidence. Many refused to believe it at first, dismissing it as human propaganda. But the evidence was too detailed, too specific, too easily verified against existing records. Within days, the first cracks appeared in the Alliance. 3 species quietly withdrew their fleets, claiming they needed to investigate the allegations before continuing military action. Their governments made carefully worded statements about wanting to ensure they were on the side of justice. 2 more species followed within a week. Their leaders had reviewed the evidence and concluded that humanity was telling the truth. They could not in good conscience fight against a species that was defending itself against the same fate that had befallen so many others. But the most significant break came from an unexpected source. The Archon Covenant had been silent since humanity's departure from the Council. They were an old species, not as powerful as the Tellurians, but highly respected for their philosophy and wisdom. They had never taken sides in conflicts, preferring to mediate and counsel. Archon Speaker Dallin addressed the galaxy with a transmission that reached every inhabited world. Her form was humanoid but translucent, her body composed of organized light. She spoke with a voice that carried centuries of sadness. "We have reviewed the evidence presented by humanity," she said. "We have consulted our own archives and interviewed our own historians. With great pain, we must acknowledge that the accusations are accurate. The Galactic Council, the institution we helped create to bring peace and cooperation, has been corrupted. It has become a tool of oppression rather than liberation." She paused, and her light dimmed slightly. "The Archon Covenant withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. We call upon all species of conscience to do the same. We call for the dissolution of the Council Defense Alliance. And we call for the creation of a new galactic institution, one founded on true equality and justice." The announcement shattered what remained of Alliance unity. Over the next 2 weeks, 7 more species withdrew. The alliance that had started with 12 members now had only 4, and those 4 were increasingly isolated. High Chancellor Vex retreated to the Loria and barricaded himself in the Imperial Palace. He issued defiant statements claiming that humanity had deceived everyone, that the evidence was fabricated, that the Thalorian Empire would never surrender. But his words rang hollow. Even on his own world, citizens were beginning to question what their government had done in their name. The turning point came when Commander James Okoye led a strike force to a remote Thalorian research facility in the Kravo system. The facility was supposed to be an agricultural research station, according to official records. What James and his team found was something else entirely. The facility contained laboratories where Thalorian scientists had been developing biological weapons designed to target specific species. There were samples of diseases that had been used against the Quinn Collective, the civilization that had supposedly died from a natural plague. There were genetic modification chambers where captured members of younger species had been experimented on, their bodies altered to test various weapons. And there were prisoners. 47 beings from 6 different species, kept in cells, subjected to tests that violated every principle of medical ethics. Some of them had been there for decades. James personally led the rescue operation. He walked through the facility with a camera, recording everything. The evidence was undeniable, horrifying, and absolutely damning. "This is what we fought against," he said into the camera. "This is why humanity could not remain in the Council. This is what happens when power is concentrated in the hands of those who see other species as tools to be used or threats to be eliminated." The footage was broadcast across the galaxy within hours. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Species that had remained neutral now declared their support for humanity. Governments that had defended the Council issued apologies. On the Loria itself, massive protests erupted in every major city. High Chancellor Vex was arrested by his own military 3 days later. The Thalorian Empire dissolved its government and began the painful process of transitioning to a new system. They would spend generations trying to make amends for what they had done. Ambassador Sarachin stood before a gathering of representatives from 43 different species. They had come together on neutral ground, a small space station called Haven that had been built specifically for this meeting. The station was simple and functional, nothing like the Grand Chamber of the old Council. "We did not want war," Sarah told them. "We wanted peace. But we learned that true peace cannot exist alongside injustice. We learned that cooperation built on lies and fear is no cooperation at all." She looked around at the assembled delegates. Some were from species that had fought against humanity just weeks ago. Others were from civilizations that had been victims of the old Council's manipulation. A few were from elder species that had genuinely not known what was being done in their name. "Today we propose something new," Sarah continued. "Not a council where elder species hold all the power. Not an assembly where might makes right. But an alliance where every member has an equal voice, regardless of their age or strength. Where decisions are made by consensus rather than intimidation. Where young species are protected and guided, not exploited and destroyed." Dr. Yuki Tanaka stepped forward with a document. "We call it the Free Species Alliance. Membership is voluntary. Every member maintains complete sovereignty over their own territory and people. Decisions about collective action require 75% agreement. No species can be forced to participate in military action against another member. And most importantly, any species that attempts to manipulate or harm another member faces immediate expulsion and sanctions. The Archon Speaker Dallin was the first to approach the document. The Archon Covenant joins this alliance. We will help build something better than what we lost. One by one, other species added their agreement. Some signed immediately. Others asked questions, negotiated specific terms, and then agreed. By the end of the day, 37 species had joined the Free Species Alliance. Admiral Marcus Webb watched the signing ceremony from the Perseverance. His fleet was still on high alert, still ready for threats. But for the first time in months, he allowed himself to relax slightly. They had survived. Against overwhelming odds, against ancient powers, against a system that had crushed 23 civilizations before them, humanity had survived. More than survived. They had changed everything. The old Galactic Council officially dissolved 6 months after humanity's walkout. Most of its member species joined the Free Species Alliance. A few chose to remain independent but signed treaties of cooperation. The elder species that had participated in the Council's crimes faced justice. Some leaders were imprisoned. Others were exiled. All of them bore the shame of what they had done. The Thalorian Empire, once the most powerful nation in the galaxy, became the Thalorian Republic. Their new government included members of species they had once oppressed. They began the long process of making restitution to those they had harmed. Sarah Chen became the first director of the Free Species Alliance. She served for 10 years before retiring to write and teach. Her book about humanity's fight for galactic freedom became required reading in schools across hundreds of worlds. Commander James Okoye was promoted to admiral and continued to serve in the Alliance Defense Force, the military arm of the new organization. He trained officers from dozens of species, teaching them not just human tactics, but human values, determination, creativity, and a refusal to accept injustice. Dr. Yuki Tanaka led the Alliance Scientific Council, overseeing research cooperation between species. She helped create an environment where scientific knowledge was shared freely rather than hoarded for competitive advantage. And Admiral Marcus Webb retired to a quiet colony world, where he spent his remaining years writing military history and teaching young officers about the importance of preparedness, not for conquest, but for defense of freedom. The galaxy never forgot the day humanity walked out of the assembly. It became a symbol of courage, of standing up to power, of refusing to be the next victim. New species entering galactic society learned about it in their first diplomatic lessons. Old species used it as a reminder of how badly things could go wrong when power was abused. Humanity had not just survived. They had transformed the galaxy. They had proven that youth and inexperience were not weaknesses, that questioning authority was not rebellion, and that sometimes the right thing to do was to walk away from a corrupt system and build something better. The Free Species Alliance grew to include over 200 member species. It was not perfect. There were disputes, disagreements, and occasional conflicts. But it was better. It was more just. It was what the old Galactic Council had claimed to be, but never was. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that humanity had learned long ago on their own world. Freedom is not given by the powerful to the weak. It is taken by the courageous from the unjust. And once taken, it must be defended with everything you have. The galaxy had watched in terror as humans marched out of the assembly. Now it watched in hope as those same humans helped build a future where no species would ever have to make that choice again. The story was not over. It would never be over. But it was a new beginning, and that was enough.